unfiltered discussions, unexpected guests. No topic is off limits, from sex and relationships to the human condition, personal anxieties, and so much more. The only talk show of its kind in the world. This is The Last Show with David Cooper.
Hello, welcome. It's Friday night into Saturday morning, and this is The Last Show. I am David Cooper, and here's an update from my tiny black cat Tomato, who's locked out of my little office room right now. I'm coming at you from New York City, a Canadian living there. I don't know why I'm telling you about myself. I should be telling you about my cat, Tomato. Really no update, except last night he didn't sleep in the bed with us. Very upsetting. Tonight's show, gonna be a great one. We got some great stories from the tech industry coming up for you soon. We'll be discussing AI slop and the dead internet theory. What are they? Well, if you've gone on LinkedIn or Facebook, you've probably seen people post pictures of themselves in toy containers. Man, the quality of the internet is going downhill right now. Those are driven by AI. Seems to be this fad. But on a deeper level, can you trust what you read on social media right now? The stats on AI-driven posts, AI-driven slop, on social media network LinkedIn are astronomical. What is happening to the internet? It's the dead internet theory. We'll explain all of that in about 10 minutes' time. After that, more nerdy stuff with a computational neuroscientist who has modeled a brain using a computer. And they've done it so well that if they show this computer brain the same stimuli, the same thing as a real brain, they get the same results. Oh, and what is that thing? The way a brain responds to a Hollywood movie. It's half neuroscience, half sci-fi, half mind-blowing, and half Hollywood fun, and I know that's too many halves. Tonight's going to be a great show. That is merely a small cross-section of it. Let us, together, dive in to Friday night on The Last Show of the Week. We'll be back next week with the first show of the week. I'll shut up. Here's the lady whispering our phone number.
Want to be part of The Last Show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644.
You're not one of the as many as 90% of people who pick their nose, right? So you don't have to worry. But for the rest of us, well, it turns out that digging for gold might be digging our way to dementia. Scientists in Australia, the world's #1 nose-picking research country, ran a study on mice and found that nose-picking can damage your nasal tissues in a way that lets some real nasty bacteria take the express lane to your brain. That's right, pick your nose, damage your nose tissue, and open the doors for nasty bacteria. One of the main microbial culprits here is something called Chlamydia pneumoniae. Chlamydia pneumoniae. Or is it pneumoniae? Which, despite the name, does not make your brain horny. It makes it sad. Very sad indeed. You see, this bacteria is already found in a majority of human brains with late-onset dementia. So naturally, somebody asked the question, how does it get up there? And the answer, horrifyingly, might be, through your nose, you filthy animal. Scientists watched the bacteria in mice ride the olfactory nerve. You know, the nerve that connects your nose to the brain, like it was a bullet train to Alzheimer's town. That doesn't sound like a fun train. And when that delicate tissue at the top of these at the top of these mice's nasal cavity, called the epithelium, I should have looked at a dictionary how to pronounce these words before I started. Anyway, when that tissue is damaged, you know, like from overzealous booger excavation, the bacteria infected the brain faster. In something like 24 to 72 hours, which is faster than Amazon Prime, which is fine for a pair of socks, but not so much for cognitive decline. Once inside the brain, this bacteria triggered the release of amyloid beta, again pronunciations, a protein that clumps up in Alzheimer's patients. Normally, that's part of the immune response, but in this case, it's like your brain is panic squirting glue everywhere and hoping for the best. Now look, this was in a mouse study, not a human one. And while humans and mice do share many genetic similarities, Between the two of us, humans and mice, only one of those species makes bad decisions at 2 a.m. and texts our ex. So maybe don't panic just yet, but maybe stop rooting around up in your nose, damaging tissue and creating a pathway for nasty bacteria. You know, like it's the clearance bin at the dollar store. One of the lead researchers on this study says we still need to confirm whether this happens in people, but he does suggest, very politely, that maybe we stop shoving our finger up there and scraping our nostrils like we're trying to tunnel out of prison. Shawshank Redemption, anyone? Now, I gotta say this before you panic. Alzheimer's is incredibly complex. We don't exactly know what causes it, and this bacteria might just be one piece of a very sad, very frustrating jigsaw puzzle. But it is a clue, and clues matter. So to keep it out of your brain, stop picking your nose. That is, until science gives us more answers. Or at least don't pick your nose with the same level of enthusiasm that you'd imply to buying a lottery ticket or exacting revenge on your enemies. Happy digging for gold, folks. I have had it with these motherfucking squirrels in my motherfucking SUV. Honestly, I'd never thought I'd relate to the plot of Snakes on a Plane in suburban Ontario, Canada, but here I am, minus the plane, plus a 2024 Chevrolet Traverse, and a squirrel infestation so personal, I'd half expect one to crawl out and say, "We need to talk." Here's the scoop. A poor woman in Burlington, Ontario is truly at her wit's end, and not in the poetic I'm done with dating apps way. No, she's fighting a full-blown turf war with squirrels that have apparently mistaken her SUV for an Airbnb burrow. See what I did there? These little gremlins have been building nests under the hood of her car, chewing up wires and decorating the place like it's Squirrel Versailles. Oh, and why is it so personal? Well, she replaced her previous car after having the same problem. Also a Chevy Traverse, by the way. At this point, in honor of the squirrels, Chevrolet should consider renaming the model to Chuvee. Oh my God. The woman says she thought getting a brand new car would solve things, and it did, for about a year. Then, like your former lover who promises they've changed, the squirrels came back, chewed through her engine, and then ghosted before the check engine light could even say boo. According to a local wildlife expert, the problem is that many modern cars use eco-friendly wiring, which seemed like a good idea in theory, but in practice, these wires contain biodegradable soy-based materials, which to rodents, delicious. And with that, your vehicle is basically a four-wheeled salad bar for rodents. Nothing says green future like a squirrel tasting menu under the hood. And because spring is also squirrel mating season, that means your warm, quiet engine bay is the marsupial equivalent of a romantic Airbnb burrow. I had to use that again, didn't I? But instead of romance and sparks, it's spark plugs, or at least the wires to them, getting chewed. One man with the same problem racked up a $4,000 bill and earned the nickname the Squirrel Man at his dealership. Which sounds cool. I wonder what Squirrel Man's superpowers would be, except it's not cool and there are no superpowers and his squirrel taming skills are none and he's just got this outstanding repair tab that's huge and annoying. And anyway, the woman I'm telling you about with the Chevy Traverse, her latest visit to the mechanic cost another $500 and there's no solution at sight. She's tried everything short of hiring an exterminator to threaten the squirrels over the phone. This poor woman is begging for answers. She's gone to the media, complained to Chevy, and quite frankly, I'm begging for answers too. Because if these squirrels start unionizing, I'm going to find myself in a full-blown remake of Snakes on a Plane, but with less venom and more nod wires and squirrels. So if anyone out there has a secret to squirrel-proofing a car, please, for the love of sanity, and Chevys everywhere, help this woman. Because I am telling you right now, I have had it with these motherfucking squirrels in my motherfucking SUV. When we come back, if you've noticed a bunch of weird, empty posts on social media that seem like they might be a robot, that's what's been happening. It's called AI slop, and it's coming to a social network near you. We'll discuss it on It's Time for Technology Time in just a moment. I know the name of what we do has the word time in it twice. It's supposed to be funny?
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888 505 6644. The Last Show with David Cooper. Procrastinate your life away with us.
Oh, we are here to discuss AI slop with the most sloppy person in all of tech reporting, me. And also Carmi Levy, an expert based out of London, Ontario, Canada, for It's Time for Technology Time. Carmi, welcome in. You see what I did there? I said you thought I was insulting you, didn't you?
I do, although, not the first time that I've been associated with sloppiness. Probably won't be the last either, so I'm happy to own it.
But being a sloppy performer and reporter is not the same as being AI slop.
No, it isn't.
Let's talk about LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
There is a...
Do we have to?
We do. There is a Reddit out there, like, social media where people post screenshots of stuff and talk about it, called LinkedIn Lunatics. And it's basically screenshots of people posting the most bizarre stuff on LinkedIn, the most unprofessional stuff on LinkedIn. And I love reading through the insane thing people say about politics and about like their diet and about how they force their employees to work for like 72 hours. And if they don't, they're not worth being at the company. You're like, just insane stuff. And that's not quite what we're going to talk about now, but I think it sets the stage for the posts on LinkedIn getting weirder and wilder, and now AI sloppier.
Yeah, you'll notice that your feeds are now filled with these people are posting these images of themselves, these action figure-like images where it looks like them, but they're inside a blister pack, and there are a bunch of other products that are relevant to them. Like in my case, it would be, I don't know, a camera, a laptop, and a microphone, or whatever it is.
For me, it would be a microphone, a bagel, and a therapist? Maybe one of those therapist chairs. What do you call those? Therapy chair that you lay on, like a chaise.
Yeah. I'm down for that. But yeah, and they're everywhere. It's like taken over LinkedIn. I blame ChatGPT. They introduced an update to their model about a month and a half ago, and all of a sudden everyone was sharing imagery that looked like Studio Ghibli, right? That art, that anime-like art. And now sort of the next thing, because now that we've burned out on Studio Ghibli, is this, you look like an action figure and you're actually in a blister pack, which just looks, it's like, look, everyone else is doing it. I should do it too. And
Ice Bucket Challenge! Remember that when people were dumping?
Oh my God, yeah, exactly. And everyone has to do it or they're not part of the club. Like, please, give me a break.
It's like,
really?
You dumped ice on your head, you raised no money, and now magically you've cured ALS. Thank you.
Yeah, like, please, give me a break. But at least with the Ice Bucket Challenge, even if it didn't raise money, at least it raised awareness. At least maybe it prompted some people to...
Fine. There was a kernel of goodness in there. With this,
a tiny one.
This is just AI slop for AI slop's sake.
It is. And I mean, what bothers me about this, and we know that AI has a super, problematic backend, consumes a huge amount of compute resources. And so when you go to generate it, and this is, you go to ChatGPT and you can actually find the prompt online, and it'll make it for you. And then it gives you the opportunity to tweak it. But the thing is, it's so energy intensive that if you try tweaking it within 30 minutes, it won't let you. It has to let things cool down before it lets you update what it's originally produced as version 1.0, which, tells me millions of people are now falling all over themselves on LinkedIn trying to create these action figures of themselves. And I imagine that somewhere thousands of miles away, these data centers are just working absolutely overtime, cranking out the heat, air conditioning barely keeping up because people have to have these stupid things in their feeds. It's like, really, is this some of the most sophisticated technology in the history of humanity, and this is what we choose to use it for? Give me a break.
The electricity or energy consumption of AI, when you're generating text, you can think of each word as like a thing. And yes, it takes a lot of energy, but generating text, each word is like a unit of generation. When you're generating an image, it's working with pixels. Each pixel is like a bunch of numbers representing color, and then each photo has like, hundreds of thousands or millions of them. And so AI's got to like generate all these numbers and all these pixels. Generating images takes up so much more electricity and computation power than generating words. And words also take a lot. And so just, I don't know, think about the environment every time you generate. Is it really worth burning like kilowatts of energy just to get a stupid action figure fad on your LinkedIn. I also want to talk about AI slop on LinkedIn that isn't images, because I'm seeing a lot of posts that are like so clearly someone's like, well, everyone's posting thoughtful stuff on LinkedIn because it's important to your career. I'm going to post something thoughtful, but I don't want to write it. So I'm just going to go into ChatGPT. I'm going to take a kernel of original thought like, oh, maybe companies need to do this in a meeting, write a post about it. And then, ChatGPT AI slops a post and then it gets pasted on social media between the AI generated posts that are definitely AI, between the AI generated posts that are steered by people. Like, I tell ChatGPT to write me a LinkedIn post with my original thought, but then it's 5 paragraphs of nonsense. And then now these images, like social media sucks right now, Carmi.
Oh, yeah. Like, not that LinkedIn was such great shakes to begin with. I've always had my problems with it. It almost felt like this sort of professional landscape where everybody was trying to outdo each other and outbrag each other, and present, like all social media, present themselves as something that they likely were not. But because it was couched in professionalism, it was somewhat better than Facebook, better than TikTok. It was more serious. But I think LinkedIn, relative to other social media platforms, has become even more vulnerable to the spread of AI because its users are using AI to, essentially expand their influence. In fact, I've seen some research that suggests that the majority of long form posts to LinkedIn are now generated by AI, that they are AI slop because, as you said, and I think you're bang on, it's a lot easier for someone to just have ChatGPT write a quote unquote thought leadership piece on their behalf than to actually write one on their own. And so it means that everyone is using AI to look smart when in fact all they're doing is flooding this platform with just stuff that nobody wants to read, nobody wants to see, doesn't add any value, and reinforces just the sheer danger of AI slop, that it turns platforms like LinkedIn into these dystopian future nightmares. But it's not the future, it's now.
Are you aware of this conspiracy theory that asserts the internet is just going to all be AI generated nonsense eventually? It's called the dead internet theory. The more stuff I see like this, the more I buy into it. And it's this theory that eventually everything on the internet will be AI generated stuff that's trained on AI generated stuff, and the whole of the internet will be garbage. You won't be able to decide. The AI will be so good that you won't quite be able to decipher between it and real people, and it'll basically be unusable. At first, when I heard this theory, I thought that's a fringe theory. That's never going to happen. I'm still not convinced it's going to happen, but stuff like this does not really help in terms of giving me good evidence that it might be an eventuality. Maybe eventually the internet will be useless in terms of interacting with people.
Well, I don't think it's a conspiracy theory as much as it is a warning of what happens if we deploy AI without the proper controls around its use. And so left to its own devices, if I can use AI to, grow my influence and not spend my time writing it, but let AI do all the heavy lifting for me. And I'm just one of millions who are trying to do the same, everyone trying to scream louder than everyone else with the biggest AI powered tools that they can get their hands on. That's kind of where we're headed. It's sort of where we're at now. I scrolled through my LinkedIn feed just this morning, and I'm virtually certain about 4 out of 5 pieces that I saw were not human generated. And I just gave up in frustration and went to play with the dog. So I think we're there, and it's not a conspiracy theory. It's a prediction of what happens if this current trend line continues. And I think what I worry about is that as multiple generations of AI sort of become reality, eventually AI will then, what will it train on? We're not going to have any fresh content for it to train on. AI will train on AI. And so eventually, what are we reading but rehashes of rehashes? And I don't really want to go there.
I think social media, in terms of trusting that people you don't know well will post things that you want, is dying.
Yeah.
I see a future with social media networks that are very closed and small. It's like, oh, I trust Annie because she's my personal friend, so I'll read what she writes, but I'm not just going to follow some stranger. And that's the way social media used to work.
Yep.
I'm not convinced it's going to be like that anymore. I'm here with Carmi Levy. We're doing the deep conversations on AI. When we come back, we'll talk delivery robots in Los Angeles and Chicago, all courtesy of DoorDash. Your food to your door by a robot. It's time for Technology It's time for Technology Time continues in a moment.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. Your nightly dose of unfiltered opinions and unexpected conversations. The Last Show with David Cooper.
It's time for Technology Time. That is the name of the segment where we take the time every week to talk the technology sector. Here with expert Carmi Levy from London, Ontario, Canada. Carmi, you are a mensch. I really enjoyed that deep conversation we had about the dead internet and stuff. Now let's talk about robots taking our jobs. DoorDash. I mean, that's my big worry, that, the future.
It's kind of where we're headed. Why not? Like, if you're a DoorDash or an Uber Eats or even an Uber, right? The entire gig economy, for that last mile, right? In order to get you home or get your meal to your house, it depends on a very low-tech solution. Hire a whole bunch of people and pay them to drive around all day, every day.
And do their best not to classify them as full-time employees so you don't have to pay them benefits. These companies, no offense, and if one of these companies is a sponsor of any program on the network we're on, it's not you. You're a great company and we love you and you treat your drivers amazingly. But all the other ones... All
hail our dystopian leaders.
All hail our sponsors. But, I won't name any by name, but it might rhyme with Zuber or Grift or Board Pass. They don't treat their drivers well. And if you asked any executive at this company if you could switch to AI robot-powered deliveries tomorrow and fire all your drivers, what would you do? We all know what the answer would be. So, these drivers, not only are they not treated amazing and not always paid amazing, although some jurisdictions, I got to hand it to here in New York, where delivery app drivers get paid a modest salary, guaranteed salary and benefits and all that. I wish more jurisdictions would force companies to treat their drivers well, but that's a conversation for another day. These companies would prefer robots to deliver their products. Amazon would love to get rid of all their workers, unless Amazon's a sponsor, in which case they wouldn't, and we love you, Amazon, but and replace them with drones. And we're seeing it in Los Angeles. In Chicago, DoorDash is starting to do it with robot delivery drivers. On the one hand, it seems like it would be a great product. On the other hand, I worry about, for society's most vulnerable, gig economy workers having less and less opportunity.
Yeah, there's no question that these companies that are headed in that direction, that they are actively investing in autonomous vehicle technology, drones. In this case, it's a company called Coco Robotics that's partnered with DoorDash. They basically look like coolers on wheels, really cute pink coolers that drive themselves down a sidewalk from the restaurant to your house. And if it means that these companies get out of the business of dealing with squishy humans, then that's where their business model is, that if they can automate the entire supply chain, the entire process, the end-to-end process, then that's what they'll do. And so basically they've been doing this in Helsinki for the last year or so. They've made 100,000 deliveries in that pilot phase and no one's died yet. And basically what they do is at the restaurant workers there, the restaurant workers will put your meal in there instead of handing it off to a DoorDash driver. And then the thing drives itself to your house, and then it goes back, it charges up, and it goes on for the next delivery. This means that it takes cars off the road, so you don't have, as they put it, a 2-ton vehicle just to deliver 2 chicken sandwiches. And so,
I mean, the couriers here in New York are on these e-bikes, and they are doing some wild driving decisions. Yeah. Some of them, not all of them, but they are running red lights. They are salmoning, driving the wrong way on streets. It's the Wild West out there.
It is. And so, to a certain extent, autonomous vehicle technology could, free up some space on the street, could lead to, let's face it, safer interactions so that you don't get mowed down by an e-bike driver making a delivery on a sidewalk when they shouldn't be. But at the same time, it also means long term, as this technology gets better, fewer opportunities in the gig-based economy for humans to fulfill that last mile requirement. You're going to see drones flying overhead. ahead, you'll see these cooler-like devices from Coco on sidewalks, and you'll see fewer e-bikes with humans on them. You'll see fewer humans behind the wheel. If you're taking a regular Uber, you'll see autonomous vehicles with no human driving as well. This is the future, and we're starting to see pilots. In this case, it's LA and Chicago that they're bringing the technology to. And by virtue of how many restaurants have already signed up, they got 600 restaurants who already want to be part of this program. I think it's pretty clear the demand for that is there. And if you're a gig economy worker and you are one of those drivers, you might want to start brushing up on your resume, because it probably won't happen tomorrow. But if we have this same conversation 5, 10, or 15 years from now, I suspect that driving for Uber Eats or DoorDash is going to be something that we're looking at in the rear view.
We're entering a future where, I don't know, I mean, you know what? If we were having this conversation over a telegraph around the turn of the Industrial Revolution, we would be complaining about how factories are automating things and we're going to lose jobs. Maybe the whole economy will shift. Maybe new jobs will open up as we, if you were a switchboard operator, who worked for a telephone company in the 1950s, plugging in calls manually, you'd be like, oh my goodness, automated switching is going to take away everyone's jobs.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm being too much of an alarmist, and I do think food delivery by robots is really cool. I would love to have my meal delivered by a robot. Having said that, part of me makes me worry. What of people who have these jobs?
Technology has always done that. Technology, by its very definition, is disruptive, and every new technology has obsoleted entire categories of jobs, but at the same time, it has created new ones as well. So maybe you won't drive for DoorDash, but maybe you'll be part of the team that manages those autonomous fleets of vehicles and, that programs the technology or whatever, who knows, but it gets rid of older capabilities and it creates new ones. And so in terms of managing your career, it isn't, I'm going to have a job, for my entire life, the same job until I retire. It's how am I going to move from one wave to another, that as the technologies obsolete certain jobs, how am I going to make sure that I stay relevant, that I train up for whatever that next big thing is? And if you're driving for a living, that's probably what you should be doing now. Frankly, everyone who's kind of in career mode these days should be looking at AI and asking themselves the question, how's that going to affect my job? Am I doing enough to ensure that I'm flexible?
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I suppose there's certain careers that are just gone and lost due to technology.
Right on. But at the same time, the envelope stuffers who used to work for the insurance company just down the street from me, they don't exist anymore. But, the teams that program the software that replace those envelope stuffers, they're still employed, at least as far as I can tell. So, old versus new, it's always been that way. It's no different now. Maybe what's changing here is the speed and scale that AI is driving that change. Instead of taking decades for new technologies to do what they do, it's taking, in some cases, years or even less, maybe months.
I've been interested in using one of these services to clone my voice to see how well it could do.
There's only one David Cooper, though, just so you know. Technology cannot replicate you.
Thank you. Maybe you don't want your voice out there, but there's services where you just give it 20 minutes of you talking.
Yeah.
And then it can be you. And I've often wanted to try it. Maybe I'll do it on the show. Maybe I should do it with you. We should see how it hosts its time for technology time. And see
I think that would be a cool experiment. I'm down with you. Okay, so I clearly have some homework, right? Look for some voice cloning tools and okay.
Yeah, I'll get it set up. We'll send it through the producer of this show, Danny. Danny, shout out. We love you. You're amazing. I don't know why you work with me, but you're amazing, and I'm glad you do.
She's infinitely patient. I've experienced that firsthand.
Yes, I think that's obvious. She produces this show. Next week, we should have a 1 minute. We got to watermark it. We got to play it over music or something, because it has to be clear it's not us. But we'll set it up, and we'll play 1 minute of us talking and see if you like It's Time for Technology Time by the Robots or by the Real Us. Are you down for that, Carmi?
I'm totally down for that, although I realize that could be the beginning of the end of human Carmi and the start of AI Carmi. But you know what? Maybe I'll do better as an AI version of myself. So I'm down for that experiment.
Here I am hoping that we'll laugh at it, but now I'm worried. What if it's really good? What if it's better than us, Carmi?
It leaves me more time to go take bike rides and walk the dog. So, maybe not a bad thing.
All right. Next week, now we got a cliffhanger. Now we got a long tease. Next week on It's Time for Technology Time, Carmi Levy, technology expert from London, Ontario, Canada, and I will generate 1 minute of this segment or 2 minutes using AI. And I'm even going to get AI to come up with what we say. And we'll see how good it is.
I like that. That sounds like fun. Will listeners prefer the robots or the real versions? Tune in next week.
Deepfake Carmi and Deepfake David coming at you. How do you know? I mean, this could be deepfake right now. Actually, you know what? We're way too stupid for it. AI is smarter than us.
Hang on. Let me pinch myself. No, I can feel it. No, it's real.
Carmi, it's always a pleasure. I'm looking forward to this experiment, and we'll put that out next week. I can't wait to do it with you.
I cannot wait either. I'm counting the days. Thanks, David.
When we come back, computational neuroscientists, well, that's a long job title, have built a digital brain twin. That's right, a brain in a computer that can predict certain behaviors. I'm David Cooper. This is The Last Show. We'll be back.
We're broadcasting relationship truths and scientific discoveries with a comedian's touch. The Last Show with David Cooper.
I'm here with someone who's cracking open one of the biggest mysteries in science, the brain. How does the brain work? Well, scientists say they've built a digital twin, a tiny simulation of a mouse brain. And they trained it on, of all things, Hollywood movies. It's half neuroscience, half science fiction, and half mind-blowing. And I know that's too many halves, but we're talking about a future where digital twin copies of our brains, a copy of what makes you, might exist. We'll discuss this with Dr. Andreas Tolias. He's a systems and computational neuroscientist at Stanford University. Andreas, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, David. It's really excited to talk about our work.
Let's start very simple here, in layman's terms, in terms that anyone could understand. What is a digital twin of our brain? And how is it different from just a fancy simulation?
Yeah. So basically, this type of digital twin is a model of the brain that doesn't implement the algorithms of the brain and how the brain processes information at the mechanistic level. For example, it's not built out of neurons or have the same type of synapses and plasticity rules as we find in our real brain, but it recapitulates, it reproduces the activity patterns inside the brain, in this case, the mouse, when it's watching movies. So you can think of it as a data collection process where we show the mouse a lot of movies, at the same time we record the activity in its brain, and then we use AI, but instead of doing next word prediction or being a large language model, it tries to predict based on these movies and based on what the animal is doing, how it's moving its eyes, how it runs on a treadmill, how these neurons are going to respond. And it's essentially using artificial neural networks, or you can think of it as a large model based on neurons that are trained to do this prediction. So that's why we call it a digital twin, because it reproduces not just the behavior of the animal potentially, but also the activity that generates that behavior.
When we think of lab mice, often they don't live a nice life. Like some of these experiments on mice do not sound fun. This one doesn't sound too bad, though. They're watching movies. What kind of films are you showing them? Why did you decide to show them Hollywood movies?
Yeah, so mice their visual system is not like ours. They have a low resolution. You can think of it as like they look with our periphery, and they're very sensitive to moving stuff, right? The mice live the way they live, they evolve, they have to avoid predators, they have to run around. So motion for them is very important. So we chose Hollywood movies like Mad Max, for example, was one of them, where there was a lot of action. And we found that this kind of movies that have a lot of motion in them drive the responses well. Because when we want to make these measurements, we want to make the measurements when the neurons are driven well, but then keep showing them natural image statistics or natural world statistics. Now, of course, these are not exactly natural for the mice. They don't go to the movies and watch metrics like we do or Mad Max, but they do have the characteristics that drive their responses very well.
So you play the movies for them, you listen to what happens in the brain, you model it, and then you show the model movies and see if it corresponds to what the mouse's brain would have done had they been. And
exactly.
Do they match?
Yeah, they match. So basically the way you do these experiments is, let's say you show Mad Max and many, many other movies, and you build a model, and then you keep some movies, let's say The Matrix, or I don't know, some other movie where you've recorded the data, but you didn't use it to train the model. And now you test the model and you say, on these held out movies that I did not use to train the model, can I predict what it's doing? And we find that when you collect a lot of data across many mice, you build this gigantic model that we call it a foundation model because it's pulling data from many experiments to build one unified model. Then once you start building digital twins of the individual neurons or the individual mice, when you show them this new type of stimuli, you get very good reproducibility. The other thing why it's important to build this model is not just for the fun of it, because maybe mice have fun watching movies, is that imagine that if you want to do an experiment in a mouse and you want to, let's say, understand how these neurons encode motion, or how do they encode colors, or how do they encode different features in the visual world. If you have a limited amount of time that you can do an experiment, because the mice have to go and sleep, and then you don't have, you only have, let's say, 1 or 2 students to run an experiment. But if you have these digital twins that are very accurate, you could then parallelize it. You can take many copies of it, and you can run what it would take thousands of years of experiments. You can run them in a few hours. And then if you make a discovery in the digital twin, you say, haha, this part of the brain is doing this and this because I've done these very extensive experiments. Then you can test it back in that same mouse the next day or even within a few hours. So that's the fascinating thing.
Yeah, you get a model brain to respond the same way a real brain would respond. Is this like a first step towards a generic model of a mammal brain? Like someday will a model of my brain tell me, let's say I never saw Mad Max, you show my model Mad Max, and then the model tells you whether I liked it or not, and then it matches what my real brain does.
Yeah, so I think, it depends at what level. In humans, it's going to be these models that we're building right now in mice, and we're going to build them in other species too. We do them at single neuron resolution. The brain, we know that the way it communicates information is at the level of individual neurons and individual spikes. And that information we can get at a large scale from animals. But we can also get it from humans, but not at that large scale. Only in opportunistic cases where there's a patient and we get this data. But in principle, you're absolutely right. The idea is that you can build these models if you can get this large scale data, maybe at different levels of resolution. Maybe in the human, it will not be single cell, but it would be with like MEG or EEG or some other modality. And then you can basically build like a digital twin of the system that you want to study. And that gives you a lot of opportunities to do these experiments in silico.
I always get presents for my girlfriend wrong because I don't spend enough time thinking about them. Do you see a future where like a digital twin of me can spend hours agonizing over what to buy Miranda, my girlfriend, for Valentine's Day? Like how far away are we from this sci-fi future of a digital twin doing something for me so I don't have to invest the time?
Yeah, I think that we may be far away because it depends at what resolution we have to build a digital twin of your brain to be able to think what present you have to buy your girlfriend or do all the other stuff. Basically, how much we can create copies of ourselves. Now, in some ways, we could do it at the behavioral level to some extent, right? Like you could have a large language model interact with you, learns about how you think, how you behave, and starts making prediction. I think that's going to become closer.
But wait, we might already be there. I'm not convinced we are.
Yeah, exactly. We may already be there. I think the critical thing is how much do we have to mimic your internal mechanics or the representations of your activity in your brain to get a precise model of your brain that then we can trust and will not make an erroneous thing, buy the wrong Valentine's present for your girlfriend and she'll be upset.
Do you have any suggestions, Andreas?
Maybe buy her some books on AI
I'll stick with flowers.
and some flowers, of course.
Dr. Andreas Tolias is a systems and computational neuroscientist at Stanford University. Andreas, thanks for talking to me about your research. This was really interesting.
Yeah, thank you, David. And it was great talking to you. Have a nice day.
Likewise. When we come back, it's the topic you've been waiting for. Food scientists have brought a certain fermented food into space, and it mutated, and now it tastes better. So will you be getting this amazing food? Mutated to deliciousness from the International Space Station? And what is it? How did this happen? That we'll find out after the break.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. Taste the forbidden fruit of knowledge. The last show with David Cooper.
Today we're going to talk about the topic on everyone's mind. Space miso. Yes, you heard that right. Miso, the food fermented in the cold vacuum of space, seasoned with delicious cosmic rays and spiced up with a micro dash of microgravity. I'm here with one of the brilliant scientists who made that all happen, boldly taking umami and miso where it's never gone before. I'm here with Dr. Joshua Evans, who's a food researcher at the Danish Technical University. Josh, welcome in. I love the topic we have today.
Thank you so much. Me too.
Miso. It is so niche. When I saw a summary of what you do, I'm like, what? Like, of all the things to pick, miso and space. And let's start there. Why miso? Of all the foods to ferment in space, why is this salty soybean paste the chosen one?
Yeah, I promise there are reasons. So I guess the way that I can explain this best maybe is to start from how my collaborator and I came up with the project idea at all. So I did this project with my collaborator, Maggie Koblenz. She's at MIT Media Lab in the Space Exploration Initiative. And I guess we were each coming into this with, of course, our own different interests. And at the time I was doing research, I'm still doing a lot of scientific research on the microbiology of novel fermentations. And what I mean by that is not only fermentation in general, so the transformation of food and drink with microbes, but specifically focusing on what happens when you combine fermentation techniques from different parts of the world with raw materials and ingredients that you have nearby to make sort of unprecedented things. And this is emerging out of work I've also been doing in Copenhagen in the restaurant industry, working with chefs and fermenters at this restaurant called Noma and other places.
I mean, that's a very well-known restaurant. When I was in Copenhagen, I was trying to get a reservation. I was also trying to see if I had the money to afford it. Side note, I didn't. But Copenhagen has a thriving, unique, innovative restaurant scene.
That's for sure. And that's where a lot of my sort of scientific work has come out of those experiences, working with these chefs. And of course, their priority was always flavor. How can we make new flavors we can use on our menus? But when I learned more and more about the microbiology and how quickly these microbes can change and adapt to new environments and how rapidly they evolve, it struck me that, okay, maybe these chefs are, having much bigger effects than they realize or are trying to. Maybe they're not only making new products, but they might also be, inadvertently shaping microbial life in new ways. And so that sort of was my interest that I brought to this project. At the time I was studying that and how, changing different substrates could change the microbiology. And then Maggie and I got connected. And Maggie is coming from, let's say, a more applied research world in space exploration. So her interests were more about how can we diversify astronaut diets? How can we make them more nourishing, more delicious? And diet, as you could imagine, actually has a huge impact on astronaut performance. So, giving astronauts enough tasty things to eat isn't just about some frivolous activity, but especially when you're stuck in an environment like the ISS for 6 months or whatever, you could imagine that maybe you get a bit bored of having really monotonous freeze-dried food all the time. And there is this phenomenon called sensory-specific satiety, which is just a technical word for getting bored of eating the same thing. And so even if you have enough, and this has been demonstrated in all sorts of different environments across all sorts of cultures, even if you have enough food in terms of volume, if you don't have enough variety, then you still will not eat as much as you need. And so having sort of like diverse, nourishing, delicious foods is a really important part of like astronaut well-being.
And fermented foods have great bacteria. Miso's a great candidate in space. It doesn't spoil very easily. So the ISS Miso, you start fermenting the stuff out there and you notice it ferments a little differently than it does here on Earth.
That's for sure.
Why?
Well, we can't say for sure, but because there's a few different factors, but our hypothesis is that it's mainly a result of microgravity and or increased cosmic radiation. And there's different reasons. There's different things that each of those factors could do. Also, we should say that there's a higher temperature on the ISS, and that definitely led to some of the differences in flavor that we found.
And what were those differences in flavor? Is space miso brought back to Earth going to be the next best, like the next big thing? Am I going to be having miso soup with space miso?
Well, probably not, because it's very, very expensive to send stuff to space, and, we have only a tiny volume on the space station.
So space miso would be hugely expensive then.
I guess so. And I also hope that that doesn't become a thing. I mean, eating space miso, because, I don't know, it just strikes me like it could easily be what should we say, just about novelty, let's say, and that's not why we did it. The main differences in flavors that we found were that the space miso was more nutty and more roasted. And these sort of roasty flavors often happen when you increase temperature, in the same way that when you're baking bread or you're roasting a piece of meat, it's sort of the same kind of reaction that's happening.
The microbial communities that exist in these fermented foods, how do they compare the space ones to the Earth ones? Like if you look at them under a microscope, are they distinctly different? Do they behave in different ways?
Well, the first thing I can say is that overall, the space miso was a miso. So we had kind of roughly similar microbial communities, roughly similar flavor compounds in similar proportions overall. And then within that similarity, there were differences. So there were the roast and nutty flavors I mentioned, and then microbiologically, we saw in particular two differences. We saw a specific kind of bacterium present in a significant quantity in the space miso that wasn't in the two Earth controls. And we also saw a higher mutation rate in the key fungus that's used to make miso, which is called koji, or Aspergillus oryzae. And that higher mutation rate very likely could have been from the higher level of radiation in space.
But did it thrive on these mutations? Like, can funguses, benefit from being closer to space and getting hit with more cosmic rays or being in microgravity? And then also, I mean, this has huge implications for how life might have been seeded on Earth from space microbes. Maybe I'm getting way too out there, and I know you're a food scientist, not like an astrobiologist, but like this is kind of exciting stuff, a novel thing that funguses would thrive and change in space and make them tastier to us.
Well, that was one of my main interests, is studying, okay, what can we learn about life and biology in general when we bring it into new environments like space? I mean, the space environment, in particular the ISS, people have been studying the microbiome there for a few years, but we still know very little about how the space environment might, lead life to change. Of course, life, wherever it goes, will adapt to its environment. And microbes maybe are a particularly tractable system for studying that, because they, compared to plants or animals, they have much higher generation times. They typically evolve more quickly. So that's the questions that you're onto there are exactly the kind of question I also found super interesting. From this study is really like a exploratory study. It's really just breaking ground. It's showing that fermentation in space is possible. So we weren't able in this study to really dig into those specific questions that you're asking about. Okay, as the koji evolved, like in a way that's beneficial to it, what exactly are those mutations doing genetically? That's sort of like something we could do down the line.
Silly one to wrap this up. If microbes can ferment well in space, what do you think the weirdest or most ambitious food we might see fermented out there? Space kimchi, Martian sourdough? Like what's the future of space cuisine?
Well, that's a really good question. I think my hope is that it could be a lot of different things. And, what I'm really interested in is how food traditions continue to diversify as they travel. So rather than it being one thing, I hope that, astronauts or whomever ends up in space sort of takes their different fermentation traditions with them and sees how they can diversify. That being said, I will maybe end with hot sauce, because one of the reasons why we chose miso, to go back to your original question about why miso, is that we wanted to do some fermented product. We wanted to study how these microbial communities can change and adapt, and also how fermentation can benefit astronauts. So we were like, okay, let's try to choose one of the foods that is particularly pungent and flavorful and can satisfy astronauts' desire for like spicy food. And so if there's one food that maybe would be particularly exciting to try next, it would be like a fermented space hot sauce.
Oh my goodness, that sounds delicious and weird and wacky. And Dr. Joshua Evans is here. He's a food researcher at the Danish Technical University. Josh, thanks for talking to me about your study, and this was a great chat. I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
Up next, a few mechanical engineers who solved the world's most difficult problem: splashback in urinals. How did they do it? And will a urinal that doesn't splash back come to you soon? Find out after the break. I'm David Cooper. This is The Last Show.
Broadcasting from the intersection of chaos and more chaos. The Last Show with David Cooper.
Once in a generation, there are scientists who make a groundbreaking discovery. There was Newton with gravity, Einstein with relativity, and Rosalind Franklin with the double helix. And now our guests have discovered a splash-free urinal. They use fluid dynamics and differential equations, in other words, nerd stuff, and they've tackled civilization's most quietly horrific problem: splashback. The result, a urinal so advanced it might just change public hygiene and truly bring us into the 21st century, and maybe how we think of geometry forever. Their names are Zhao, Kavee Thurairajah, and Randy Hurd, and they are a combined team of mechanical engineers from Weber State University and the University of Waterloo. Zhao, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for the invitation.
Kavee, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And Randy, hello.
Thank you.
Let's start with the splash zone. For people who have never given urinals a second thought, or maybe don't use urinals, what is the problem of splashback, and why is it humanity's most pressing problem?
So if you're somebody who's used a urinal, if you walk into a bathroom and you take a whiff, or if you're not and you've walked by the men's bathroom, you might smell the results of the splash zone. As you urinate onto a urinal, we estimate that about 1% of the urine is splashed back, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it adds up really, really quickly. With the 56 million urinals that there are across the United States, that's about 350,000 to 1 million liters of urine splashed on the floor every day.
My goodness, that is a lot of urine. And look, if you're in a busy bathroom, 100 people go in, 1%, that's a full urination that it doesn't make it in the urinal per 100 people. I'm thinking of, a sports stadium. I'm thinking of a concert hall, and I'm also thinking disgusting. And I think it speaks not very well to men that we can put up with this. But let's get deep in here. You guys saw a problem and you thought math can fix this one. What exactly did you do to try to fix this?
Physics and mathematics. Starting from physics. Okay, so when the drop of the train or the stream impinging on a surface, you observe this in either bathroom or when you do your dishes under the faucet. And you may find that when the stream or the drop of the train impinging on the plates at the shallow angle, and then the splash will be reduced. And we did some experiments inspired by this daily observation. We did some experiments in our lab, and we find, so if that impinging angle is shallower than 30 degrees, which is we call it a critical angle, then the splash is mostly gone. And this is the one small piece takeaway from physics. And then we think, okay, how can we design a surface so that no matter how you do your business and at what moment over your business, and we want to design the urinal surface so that the impinging angle is always smaller than or equal to that critical angle, which is 30 degrees we just discovered. So this is our design goal, and to achieve this, we have to solve a differential equation to do that. Actually, it is a classic problem in the mathematics. It's called orthogonal surface or orthogonal curve. And this is how we use a little bit of physics and then a little bit of mathematics to design the urinal.
Solving one of the world's most pressing problems, you create 2 new urinals, 2 prototypes, I imagine. One is named the Cornucopia and one is named the Nautilus. I love these names. They're so ambitious. Which one worked the best and what was the difference between the two?
Before Kavee answer the questions, I want to say one thing. Our original name for the urinals are called Nautilu and the Cornucopia, but the journal did not like our wordplay came up by Kavee, and they made us to change it back to Nautilus and the Cornucopia because they think it's misspelling. And Kavee, can you explain a little bit more about the names?
I love that an academic journal was raining on your pee parade.
Yeah, so the names are just sort of based on the base curves that we either extrude or revolve in order to generate the urinal shapes. If you solve the equation in different planes, so sort of the top view or the side view, you get either a log spiral, which is the curve that describes the shell of a nautilus, or the arms of a galaxy. And so that's why we went Nautilu. The curve that comes in the other plane, it's a little bit more complex. We just kind of thought it looked a little bit like a cornucopia. And so we called it that. The cornucopia design, it is not the most effective simply because it's very dependent on user height. It's a very mathematically beautiful solution, which is why we included it in all our testing, but it is, somewhat selective for user height. And additionally, there are some difficulties in like reaching your arm in to clean it, which is just a practical issue. The Nautilu design, it is much more appropriate for users of essentially any height. In fact, it actually exceeds ADA standards. And in addition, it is a much more easy urinal to reach your arm in and clean. So from both of those perspectives, that's probably the more commercially viable design.
Okay, well, how did the experiments go? Like, you had a bunch of people who do their business, as Zhao said, and like, what was the results? Was splashback completely reduced to 0%?
So we didn't actually have people test this for sanitary reasons. So we built a person, I guess you could say, or just one part of a person, which is we had a series of pumps and valves to control flow rate, and an anatomically accurate 3D printed nozzle, which we used to simulate urination. And then I read quite a bit, more than I ever thought I would, on human urination rates. And we tested the urinal at various different rates that went all the way from the low end. So if you're, getting older and getting up a couple times a day to pee in the night, that might be more representative of your flow rate. And then we had the very high flow rate, I guess, if you've been holding it in for quite a while.
I got a weak stream. I don't know what's happening as I age. It gets weaker and weaker. So I love that you're accounting flow rates. Study engineering, they said. You could change the world, they said. Did you guys ever think you would be working on a project like this when you started with mechanical engineering in earnest?
I actually did. I mean, I think that might sound weird, but I kind of always had a dream to get more into something real. That was something off-putting early, is that these ideas sometimes get too abstract and the engineers get deep in the theory. And I always had this desire to just do something practical, and I'm not really ashamed if it's kind of silly. So yeah, I was really glad that an opportunity came along to do something that you can actually explain to the average person and they can appreciate the result.
Do you guys think Big Toilet, the industry that controls the world with a stranglehold, is going to take your findings and possibly redesign urinals based on them?
I'm hoping so. I think we've actually already have been reached out to by a few organizations, and you see there's a lot of inserts that go into urinals that are wildly popular. So I don't know why people wouldn't want to just simplify the process and just have a urinal that does the job right the first time.
The last thing, as I read your paper, and it was very dense with the math, there was something called the urino, which is a hostile urinal that splashes back the maximum amount at someone. I worry like my ex-wife would buy me something like that. What were the results with the urino?
The same fundamental physics and mathematics behind that, but we maximize the splash. So one application for that is you can install it outside the Irish bar. Because, for the obvious reason, people pee on the wall. And then if you have that outside and the drunk man will get revenged.
Yeah, revenge on the drunks who don't make it into the target. You guys are amazing. I hope you change the world with this one. Thank you so much for being on the show. We have Zhao Pan, Kavee Thurairajah, and Randy Hurd, an inter-university team working at Weber State and the University of Waterloo. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up next, a biologist about your forgotten organ. An organ that's as important as your heart, and it's not even an organ. It's the bacteria in your gut. A new finding connects certain microbes that you can eat with better moods. That's right. Bacteria in your gut can make you feel better. How? Find out with me in a few moments.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. The show that asks the questions other shows are afraid to ask. The Last Show with David Cooper.
I'm here with someone who studies the connection with your gut and your mood. So yes, technically this interview is about feelings and poop, but in an educational context. Dr. Katerina Johnson, a biologist, is here to talk about her new study on how probiotics might help reduce negative emotions in healthy adults. She works at Leiden University in the Netherlands. Katerina, first off, welcome to the show.
Hi, David. Thanks for inviting me onto your show.
The big question is, can the right bacteria in our guts cheer us up? Or are we just fooling ourselves into eating fancy yogurt? That's the big question. But I want to start here. I remember reading 5-10 years ago that the gut microbiome, your gut flora, the bacteria in your stomach is so important to your body. People call it the forgotten organ. Is there truth to that?
Yeah, so it was around 10 years ago when I was deciding what I wanted to focus on for my PhD. And this was exactly what caught my eye. I saw there was this really complex community of microbes living in our gut called the gut microbiome. And some real new research was starting to show that, maybe it could affect, our brain and behavior. So that was what got me hooked.
There's at least 5 to 10 individual pieces of bacteria in our stomach, right? Maybe a little bit more.
There's like trillions of microbes in our gut. It's one of the most complex communities and ecosystems, really, that we could kind of study. So I often think about, my research is trying to combine two of the most complex things that we don't really understand, the brain and the microbiome in our gut.
I was right in an order of magnitude. I was an order of magnitude off. Throw in quantum mechanics and you've got the most complicated field ever. But okay, let's talk about probiotics. I hear this sort of as a diet fad thing. Everything is a probiotic these days. But what does it really mean? And are all probiotics created equally?
Yeah, exactly. So, in this study, we were using probiotic supplements, and which, lots of people have started to take. But, really science still doesn't have a good understanding of, precisely how probiotics work and all the various effects, they may have on our physiology. And I think it's good to know that there are natural sources of probiotics in our diet that, humans have been eating for, centuries and centuries, like, fermented cheese and, sauerkraut and, foods like that. And also prebiotic fiber, which helps promote the growth of beneficial gut bacteria. And that's in various foods like bananas and legumes and, whole grains and things like that. And in fact, some of my other work on the human microbiome from my research at Oxford found that eating naturally occurring sources of probiotics and prebiotics was linked to a more diverse microbiome, which we typically take as a kind of marker of a healthy gut.
So if I'm eating McDonald's every day and potato chips and things that come in plastic wrappers with expiration dates that are 100 years from now, generally, it has an effect it can affect our brain?
Yeah, well, this is a whole new research at the moment. There's a lot of interest currently about ultra-processed food and, how that might affect our gut. But yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that there is incontrovertible evidence in favor of is eating a lot of fiber. Our microbes really love digesting our fiber and helping us out digest our fiber. And also in the process of doing that, they actually produce chemicals that can have various effects on the body. They can be anti-inflammatory, and there's some research suggesting that they could also affect the brain as well. So yeah, feeding our microbes can, help us feel better too.
So we're not just, the old saying, you are what you eat isn't just true. It's you are what the bacteria inside you eats as well.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, there's a lot of, one thing that's really striking is that there's so much variation between one person and the next as to their gut microbiome composition. And a lot of that we don't really understand why. So genetics plays a role, but it seems to be relatively minor. And, there have been large studies looking at all these different factors like what we eat and our lifestyle, and they all seem to play a part. And it's not just what we eat as well. So other factors, for example, stress, we know that can really deplete the abundance of beneficial gut bacteria. It's a whole mix of things, really. But yes, one aspect that is coming out is the importance of our diet, which, obviously you might expect with the microbes living in our gut and, everything we eat.
Yeah, I think the reasoning behind it was always quite simple. Like, oh, you want to be healthy, you get all these vitamins, you get this, that, and the other. I think as we dig deeper into okay, this is how our microbiome reacts to these kinds of foods, we get kind of more interesting results. Let's get to your study, though. Mood linked with probiotics, mood linked with your gut microbiome. What is this connection, and what exactly did you look into?
Yeah, so because we're interested in this gut-brain connection. And, some studies, but largely previous research in animals has shown that the gut microbiome can affect the brain and emotional state. So participants were given either a probiotic or a placebo for a month. And like you say, the most significant finding was this reduction in negative mood that we see in those taking probiotics, but not people taking the placebo. And it started to show up around 2 weeks. And this is the first study where people's mood has actually been tracked on a daily basis to assess the effects of probiotics. And one thing that was interesting was by the end of the month-long study, it actually looked like their negative mood was still improving.
And tell me more about this journaling, this tracking, and what role that played in.
Yeah, so people were asked every day, how positive they were feeling or how negative they were feeling. And this hadn't really been done before with respect to looking at the effects of probiotics on mood. And it was really striking because just by asking people how they were feeling each day, we could detect the beneficial effects of probiotics on mood. But when we used standard kind of psychological questionnaires that are common practice in the field, they weren't actually sensitive enough to pick up these changes. And one reason for this is, a disadvantage of questionnaires is that they can kind of attempt to dissect how people are feeling into discrete categories, like how stressed are you or how anxious or how depressed. But, if you're just asking someone, oh, how positive or negative are you feeling? It's more kind of an all-encompassing question that can capture, a change in any emotional state.
I think I can relate to that. I wake up every day and I feel a certain way, and I go and I do my job, and I do that job whether I feel great or whether I feel cruddy. And it's more like a general feeling. I'm sure if I filled out a survey with specifics, my answers might be the same every day. But I do kind of have each day has its own color or vibe. And so, yeah, it's interesting how, generally speaking, if people are taking these supplements, their general mood is better based on a journal and less based on a survey. What's your take on all this? What do you think the mechanism at play is here?
Yeah, I mean, there are various routes through which bacteria in our gut can affect our brain. One important one is the vagus nerve. So that's the nerve that connects our gut and brain. We also know that bacteria in the gut have potent anti-inflammatory effects, and the state of our immune system is being increasingly linked to our kind of mental health. And bacteria in our gut can also affect lots of other chemicals and hormones, factors like cortisol, the stress hormone. So there's lots of different pathways at play. The question is one more important than the others? They're probably all interlinked somehow, knowing how complex biology is, which is why I love it, but also why it can be quite tricky to study.
I am here with Dr. Katerina Johnson, a biologist who works at Leiden University in the Netherlands. We are talking gut health and the effect your gut has on your mood. Earlier, Katerina, you mentioned a nerve that connects your gut and brain. I've never heard of that, and I need to know how this nerve or organ or whatever it is works, which is to say the nerve that connects your stomach and your brain, where messages get sent in both directions. That we'll discuss and answer your questions about after the break.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. We're here because your heightened awareness deserves heightened entertainment. The last show with David Cooper.
Your mood and your gut. Can what you eat affect how you feel? I'm here with someone who has studied that. Her name is Dr. Katerina Johnson. We continue our conversation. She works at Leiden University in the Netherlands. Katerina, welcome back to the show.
Thanks. So pleased to be back and continue talking.
We were chatting about your study that gave participants probiotics and checked in with them every day on their mood. As you were talking, you mentioned a nerve that connects your gut and your brain. Why have I never heard of this? And I know you don't know the answer to that question, but tell me about this nerve. That sounds fascinating. I didn't realize there was this direct connection like that.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it allows signals to travel in two directions. So from the gut to the brain and from the brain to the gut. And what research found was that actually most of the neurons making up the vagus nerve are traveling in the direction from the gut to the brain. And so this really shows us that the brain's actually more of a receiver of information from the gut rather than just, people tend to think, the brain's in charge and telling, the gut what to do. But actually there's a lot of important information in the gut that the brain needs to know about. And the vagus nerve does also connect like a lot of our organs in the body, like our heart and our lungs, all to the brain. But it used to be thought that it was largely just its role was more just kind of our basic physiology. But now in kind of recent decades, we're realizing that the vagus nerve seems to affect elements of our brain involved in, thinking and memory and our emotion, and it's made it much more fascinating at the same time that, the gut microbiome field is expanding.
I'm pretty sure my brain's telling my gut to do cruel things to me all the time. I have IBS. It's a sexy fact about me. I think the S in IBS stands for sexy and the I stands for irate. But I'm pretty sure, because sometimes I eat something and immediately, I don't know, I feel different. And I'm sure there's this connection, and I guess that's what this might be. Let's get away from my silly gut habits and ailments and talk back to you about your study. Who is more likely to respond better to a probiotic?
Yeah, so once we saw this reduction in negative mood in people taking the probiotics, I was really interested to look at, can we actually predict who would best respond to probiotics based on their psychological traits? And this hadn't been done before. And I found that various traits, particularly people who tended to be more risk averse, were the ones whose mood benefited most from taking probiotics. One interesting thing to do with this is because there is actually some evidence that people who are more risk avoidant may be more vulnerable to, developing depression. And so kind of ultimately, one of the possibilities from research like this, although obviously more studies would have to be conducted first, is that, in the future, probiotics could perhaps be used kind of in a targeted way, to help prevent kind of low mood progressing to, mental health conditions like depression.
That's fascinating. Why risk-averse people responding better and those who want to go bungee jumping and skydiving, they can avoid the yogurt kind of thing? Is there any reason for this, or you just found the connection, you don't really know why yet?
Yeah, so at the moment, it shouldn't be taken as advice that if you're risk averse, you should take them. If you're not, it's not like that. We don't know enough about probiotics to say that we should have them or not anyway at this stage, because there's still a lot to find out about them. But it was interesting that it was this risk aversion that really came out, and we think it might be because people that are risk avoidant, it is kind of a characteristic that tends to maybe make someone more susceptible to developing kind of depression. So that could be one reason.
2 weeks into your study, people started to feel better. This is the same timeline as most antidepressants.
Yeah, so this was interesting, this kind of comparable, time scales that we saw. It was roughly after 2 weeks that people improved. And it might be a sign that both antidepressants and probiotics can affect our mood through, like shared pathways, because we do know actually that both can signal to the brain through the vagus nerve, that main nerve that connects our gut and brain, and also that both antidepressants and probiotics can have, anti-inflammatory effects. And one of the other interesting things on a related note is that from our results, we found that probiotics reduce negative mood, but not positive mood. And often with antidepressants, you see a phenomenon known as emotional blunting, where both the experience of negative and positive emotions is dulled. So, if what our data suggest is true, that probiotics don't cause the dulling of positive emotion, this could really be kind of a finding, worth pursuing. Although, obviously at this stage, this is just intriguing scientific data, that we have. So needless to say, probiotics shouldn't be, considered a substitute for antidepressants.
Well, I'm on antidepressants. I'm actually on a mood stabilizer and an antidepressant, and I find that compression of the very low and the very high sometimes helpful, because when you have depression or bipolar disorder, like mania, the very high mood can be just as damaging, if not more damaging, than the very low mood. So for some people, that compression is a good thing, but for others who are just looking to lift their moods generally a little bit, that may not be a good thing. So yeah, this is an interesting finding. What probiotics, are there downsides to probiotic supplements? Like, should I just go grab one and take one every day?
It's still a very kind of new field, and we don't really know much about all their effects in the body, and, it's biology. So, they could potentially have, negative effects as well. There doesn't seem to be, anything, that could be really, bad about them. But, there are some findings that, like if you're healthy and your microbiome's already teeming with bacteria anyway, so any extra bacteria that you ingest might not easily colonize, the gut. And we're not sure about how they might interact with antibiotics as well. So there is some new research that, it's a mixed picture at the moment. I know the public don't like uncertainty, but as scientists, we deal with that all the time. So, I wouldn't say at the moment to, rush out and worry about, having them or anything. But it's interesting that, even we can still think about our diet and, foods that are good for our gut health anyway.
So not based on your study per se. Your study is not law. Do not take probiotics based solely on that. But it might be a good idea for general health reasons, is what I'm hearing.
The research, I don't think that our research should be taken as advice, because, there's still a lot of unknowns we don't know about probiotics and their effects. I think it comes down to, personal choice, and especially, if someone has a pre-existing condition, or maybe, a gut condition, and it's something that, their doctor thinks might help them. But in terms of the general population, there's not anything to, there's no kind of strong evidence at the moment that, for them to kind of, be prescribed or anything. So I think most of what we're interested in it. And, I know some people in the field that take probiotics and some people, that don't take them. So, it kind of comes down to what you choose. But I like to just, eat various cheeses and natural sources of probiotics, and, make sure I have a lot of, fiber. I think, the main takeaway from our research isn't, I take probiotics and make me happy, because it's such a complex field. There's so many things we don't know, and there's so many aspects that can affect, our mood and how we feel. But, from a scientific perspective, it's interesting that we find this, and, we really hope that maybe in the future this field might be able to come up with, novel solutions for mental health. But, our findings do support the strength of the connection between our gut and the bacteria living in it and our brain. And I think it is good for people to be kind of aware that gut health is being increasingly linked to mental health. So yeah, I would say kind of watch this space. We don't know all the answers at the moment, but we definitely know that there's this connection, and it's good to look after our gut for sure.
Kimchi, probiotics, fermented cheese, whatever you do, just try to get good bacteria in your gut. Katerina, thank you for talking to me today about your study. It was a great chat.
Yeah, you're welcome. Always love talking about science.
Dr. Katerina Johnson is a biologist who works at Leiden University in the Netherlands. That's a wrap on the show. That's a wrap on the week. And this was The Last Show. I'm David Cooper, and we'll be back with the next show Monday night. Don't forget to check out our podcast at www.lastshow.pizza. That's lastshow.pizza, not .com. I've got no sage-like wisdom for you. So just, take care.